better suited to be in this position than right now. You know, a lot of teams in the NFL, when they get injured, they, especially in the offensive line, they're done. They're done. Their depth at the offensive line position isn't that great. But for the Detroit Lions, it's a little bit different. Number one, they have one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL in Hank Fraley. That cannot be understated. That cannot be understated. I remember a young Coyote Oshika went to play against the Buffalo Bills on Thanksgiving, playing Ed Oliver. Ed Oliver is a monster, and Hank Fraley got Coyote Oshika in his rookie year as a UDFA to play pretty well against Coyote against Ed Oliver. Um, but when you look at guys like Michael Neese, the guy who really performed well in the preseason, you look at a guy like Dan Skipper who could potentially put in, Giovanni Manu, who's a right tackle, Colby Sorzal. These are guys that could potentially be relied upon. I don't think Sorzal's on the roster, but you know, when I went through the roster, let me just double check real quick. But when I went through the roster with the offensive line, it was pretty pretty ridiculous. All right, let me see. Let me see. Claudio Chica, Ben Hogan Hayden was that's long snapper. Giovanni Manu, Michael Neese. Yeah, Colby Sorzal is on the roster. So I was just trying to make sure because obviously it's so fluid in the way that they do it. But I really do think Detroit's well orchestrated to take a hit on the offensive line. You know, as good as Frank right now is, and he's a great offensive lineman, one of the best centers in the NFL. You're lucky that you have a guy like Graham Glasgow who could play center and who has played center for Jared Goff before. There was a game I think Frank Braden was out and Graham Glasgow. I think he played in. But when you talk about a guy like Graham Glasgow, he's played center before. It's no stranger to him. He's obviously was learning a new position. Obviously, with Zeitler coming over, he moved over to the right guard. But him going to center is he played at Michigan too. So I think having a guy like Hank Fraley, having a guy like Graham Glasgow, a dependable player on the offensive line that could go and play center, that's really well orchestrated. Obviously, you don't want to put a UDFA center in there, or you don't want to put a guy who hasn't played center at the center position. That's when you get in a lot of snapping issues, especially with shotgun, even under center with the quarterback center exchange. We have to imagine that Graham Glasgow it was taken apart and snapping with Jared Goff way before this. So the Lions will be all right at the center position. When you look at like the defensive line position, obviously losing a guy like Aleem McNeil in the day-to-day scenario, it sucks. But Aleem McNeil in that defensive line, especially that defensive tackle room, I think they're well orchestrated to get away from that too. Kyle Pecco could step in. Obviously, we've heard about Levi Enrique being as good as he has. Makai Wingo, who played great last week, by the way. We'll get into that when we get into the pass rush, but losing him sucks. Losing Aleem McNeil sucks, but he's day to day. Another person that's day to day is Sam Laporta. Now here's another thing. This is where the Lions are well orchestrated to kind of get through injuries because their depth is so good. Obviously Sam Laporta is a fixture of the offense. He's a huge part of this offense. But when you talk about the offense and you talk about the backup tight end, it's Brock Wright. And I have full confidence that Brock Wright is a tight end, especially blocking, especially receiving. We've seen him be a good receiver, not as good as Sam Laporta, but he's satisfactory. He could do the job. That's what you want out of your backups. Your backups are not going to be better than your starters. Very rarely that happens, but we see it a little bit with the Everett, whatever. But we see it sometimes, but it's not very practical to think that your backup is going to be better than your starter, especially a guy like Sam Porter, who his production was one of the best in the league last year, and he's had a slow start this year because of injuries and offense trying to catch up. But he'll be back, and he's only day to day as well. But when you look at guys like Marcus Davenport, When you look at guys like Derek Barnes, they're going to miss a considerable amount of time, especially Marcus Davenport, who's going to be out for the year. It's going to be who's going to step in for him. We'll talk about that on the next segment. But, you know, losing Marcus Davenport, I think we all agree that we didn't see him playing the year out because of his injury history. I don't think any of us said, oh, darn, he didn't stay healthy again. I don't think any of us are saying that. But if you are, he's injured. So he tore his tricep. So that's what it is. So Derek Barnes is another one. We heard Kelvin Shepard talk about it on, multiple radio appearances, especially in the training camp, saying that he thinks he has four starting linebackers with Rodrigo, Barnes, and Anzalone and Campbell. Now has three. Now he has three. And is it a bad thing that that Derek Barnes is gonna be gone for a while? Yeah, because Derek Barnes is really coming into his own. I feel like Derek Barnes is starting to become the player that we all thought he would be. I mean, he was that NFC championship, that NFC divisional game where he made the interception. Great, and he's building off that. I thought early in the year, I thought he was building off that and really becoming the player that I thought he was going to be at when he came from Purdue. But Malcolm Rodriguez is is a good backup, a great backup actually, and him coming in the starting lineup, I think he could start for a couple of teams in the NFL. So when you talk about a guy stepping in for Derek Barnes named Malcolm Rodriguez, I feel comfortable with that. I do. So it could be a lot worse for the Detroit Lions. Let's just put it that way. It could be a lot worse. But when you talk about this team and you talk about what they're capable of, these injuries really aren't going to hamper them big time because of the depth. And a lot of people have talked about the Lions and what if they, the injuries obviously are mounting, but when you look at the depth that this team has, like obviously you can't take many more injuries because at some point the levee does break. But when you look at this Detroit Lions team, there's more depth than there's ever been before. If you would have told me a couple of years ago that this team would have depth at nearly every position, I would have called you a liar. But the reality of the situation is this: Malcolm Rodriguez stepping in for Derek Barnes isn't really a big of a downgrade. Graham Glasgow stepping in for Frank Ragnow, it's a bit of a downgrade, but it could be a lot worse. You look across the NFL, there's people that don't even have three offensive linemen that should start, but they have five offensive linemen, and a lot of offensive linemen, a lot of offensive lines suck in this league. So for us to have some backups like Graham Glasgow, Kyle Yoshika, Michael Neese, those are reliable things that could happen, and especially when you have a good offensive line coach like Hank Fraley, that's where you really get your money worth. And then you look at a guy like tight end Brock Wright could step in for Sam Laporta. Is he Sam Laporta? No, he's obviously not Sam Laporta, but he is a good backup and he can step in and make a difference. I'm not worried about the Detroit Lions, you know, injuries. I know they suck, but the reality of the situation is over a course of a year, you go through injuries. That's why when I do my preview, I look at the room. I look at what do I grade the room as? I didn't grade the wide receiver room that great. I didn't grade the quarterback room that great because we haven't seen Hendon Hooker play some meaningful games. I graded the running back room great. I graded the tight end room great. I graded the offensive line great. I even graded the defensive line great. I thought the defensive line had some really good depth pieces. Obviously, you're looking for that guy that could be on the opposite side of Hutch. We're going to talk about that next. But, even the linebacker room, like I thought that was pretty deep, with Ben Neiman and, Trevor Nowakowski and Malcolm Rodriguez. Even you look at the safety positions, if Atimella Fallon was out right now, but Brian Branch is there, Brennan Joseph, Kirby Joseph, you know, um, Lawrence Strickland, who has played pretty well on special teams. Cornerback, same thing. Like we were talking about Kendall Vildor being a starting cornerback last year. He is not, he's a depth piece now. He's a depth piece now where he should be. And he was satisfactory, but he's not a starter. He's a depth piece. And there you go. And look, when your depth piece is Kendall Vildor and Khalil Dorsey, you could do a lot worse at corner at that point. So the Detroit Lions have built a good enough roster where they can maintain getting by with a little bit of injury.